President's Council made up of government officials, private industry, environmental community leaders. You've never had that group of people coming together before to deal with these issues, and that we would not do ourselves or the country a service if we were to somehow or another have a series of environmental goals and economic goals. Rather, they must be one and the same, and they must be taken into account together. And to even have a debate that separates them, I don't know is all that helpful, but rather they have to be intertwined.
Just in thinking this through a bit and picking up on both Carol Browner's and Katie McGinty's point, I think if we really go beyond the rhetoric, we do have to go deeper into the analysis of how economic decisions are made. And I think the present situation is that it's a sequence. The economic decision is made, and then the environmental consequences are analyzed. And I think when we really talk about sustainable development, we have to bring the environmental impact earlier into the economic decision-making process, and maybe that's more of a goal than a principle. But I gather that may have been somewhat what Katie McGinty was getting at. That we don't always sort of play catch-up and see the economic impact of environmental decisions, but that we see the environmental impact of economic decisions at the outset.
Jonathan, we're going to shift gears and talk about public linkage dialogue and education tools.
Okay. I want to give this working group a heads up. The Vice President has said he particularly wants to participate in the Sustainable Communities discussion. We think he will arrive at 10. In that case, we'll get maximum disruption, and we'll cut you off wherever you are so we can start the Sustainable Communities discussion and then pick up right where you were. That will give you a chance to rethink and regroup. The two co-chairs of this working group are Michelle Perot and Judith Espinosa. Judith, were you going to begin? Michelle.
Can we assume that whether we're disrupted or not, we have 10 minutes or half an hour?
Have half an hour.
Okay. These public linkage, dialogue, and education, in our report we called it a committee. It was our understanding that that would also be a task force that might not sunset, and we're recommending that it would be we would recommend an ongoing group for public linkage, dialogue, and education. The members also included Ken Lay, Tim Worth, and Dave Guzzelli. What I will do in my time is just give somewhat of an overview, also refer to page 5 of the questions from the start, so you know what we're asking of you. And then Judith Espinosa will talk about the work plan, and Deputy Secretary Kunin will discuss in particular what we are recommending as a subcommittee on education and some particular views that she will bring to that. We're asking the Council to discuss the proposed work plan and its projects, give some sense of priority to them, and consideration for funding. We did not have a budget to work with, and so we were told to dream big and the money would come later. And we've gone on that assumption. We also will need feedback on how the Council can relate to the other committees, because in some of the task force reports, education is mentioned as well. We're asking the Council to clarify areas where it is seeking public input. It's one thing to ask for general questions and to have a microphone at meetings like this, but are there certain timetables for public comment on particular issues? We need to set that out so the public knows if they're commenting on what the Council might do in regard to response to the UN Commission on Sustainable Development, for example, and its suggested topics. There's not any knowledge out there from the public as to where they fit in particular matters as we have this 2 to 4 year time period. We also need guidance on how some of the projects will be financed and what criteria should be set up for projects where other groups around the country have indicated an interest in helping with the Commission's work. Who should set those up? Should there be any? Or should we just say that every bit of help coming in should be used? We've had requests to put the council's approval on particular projects so that they could in turn go for funding. How do we deal with those issues? And how do we identify existing resources so there's not duplication? The committee was asked to propose an outreach dialogue strategy to enhance both the participation and awareness of organizations and individuals as proponents of integrating economic growth and sustainably effective use of natural and cultural resources. We've been excited by the various groups that have been submitting things to us for the benefit of the council members. I've put together a list of the many kinds of documents and projects that have come in. And I don't know how the council would like to get to know some of those better, but some examples include specific community efforts, such as Olympia, Washington's efforts for sustainable community, Arlington County, Virginia, projects that you all received, I know, one copy each from the Center for Policy Alternatives, which was on some of the good things that were happening in different states. We have a resource development plan from the Zuni Nation, which has been submitted for approval. These are wonderful projects to look at. So we'll make sure that you have the list, at least of the ones that I know have come in, but all of you individually may have contacts with the public, and in addition, have projects that you can let us know about that exist. And then we need to find some way of sharing those with the larger public outside the council so that they can take advantage of the many, many efforts that are taking place out there. In addition, we've had some recommendations for help. In some cases, groups like a group that's associated with the Tides Foundation has actually received a large grant to begin to do a roundtable information forum, which will then share information on how the roundtable efforts in Canada have been working. We've had the Global Tomorrow Coalition with their group on Sustainable America, who are willing to do toolkits and training projects, and have proposed a national global assembly that could be following up and helping us on our work so that there isn't so much expenditure of funds directly from the council, but from other groups' efforts. In addition, and I'm just giving you slight examples, there's a large effort by many of the different departments, Commerce, Defense, Energy, Interior, EPA, Health and Human Services, have about at least $750,000 identified for work that they would like to do in celebrating the 25th anniversary of Earth Day. And how does the council's work fit into that? And what happens in that large 1995 celebration of Earth Day as the issue of sustainable development, which they want to relate in teleconferences around the country and the world, how does that relate to our work and what we might like to highlight as well? Then there's one other area that's not on page 5 that we would need some guidance, and it has to do with, this is an example. It was a letter request from Congressman Porter for what were the views of the council on supporting a commission on sustainable development that he has proposed in a piece of legislation. And a letter was sent back by Dave Buzzelli suggesting that the Public Linkage Dialogue and Education Task Force is responsible for an outreach strategy that will include advocacy. I always like advocacy, and I think that's a good idea, but we're in a difficult position as deciding what that advocacy role should be in terms of speaking for the council on a piece of legislation. So I would just suggest that that's an area we also would need some guidance. So I'm going to turn it over to Judith now for more discussion on the work plan.
Thank you very much. Can everyone hear me?
No.
No? Now? Okay. Let me mention to you that one of the principal reasons why we put the work plan together was to get some feedback from the council. Nothing is presupposed here and nothing is in concrete. As Michelle mentioned, we are here to present what we feel would be support of the council and its activities, as well as actual integration of the work of the council with the public. And that needs to be an interrelationship that this council has with the public. You know, when I was going around New Mexico this year, we have a great diversity of agricultural production in the state. And I couldn't help but thinking when we were putting our work plan together how this kind of relates to particularly our chili plant production in New Mexico. We have very fertile valleys with very fertile soils in much of the valley areas. And I liken that to much of the public, where we have heard from them already, where there are very fertile ideas. And hopefully this council will plant the seed, and the public will be that basis for which this council's work is done. And the public will be that fertilization of the council's work. Because we do believe that it is very important, and the premise of the committee is that we cross-cut across all socioeconomic groups. We bring in the diversities of population that we have in this country, and we seek to look at all ethnic and market segments of the country. We will do collaborative planning as well as consensus building with those members of the public. We cannot set ourselves up as the only authority, but we should promote and encourage creative approaches and make sure that we as a society are aware of the consequences of our behavior, and that we look towards what the principles and goals will be established to make sure that we think and act locally, that the accumulation of that local thinking and those actions are going to impact our nation on sustainable development, as well as affect the global results that we all want to see. To that end, we have set some examples of action plans and actions that could take place by support of the Public Linkage Dialogue and Education Committee. And we also are going to look to Governor Coonan to give us some ideas on education, which I think she has gotten more specific than some of what is in our work plan already. One of the best ways we feel to make sure that we obtain public input is through town meetings around the country. Now that is difficult, and that is also somewhat expensive, and it is also a matter of getting out to the public. But doing town meetings in various settings, and not necessarily with all the council present, but with support of the council, seems to me that you can provide for a diverse group of thinking. You can request public input as well as receive practical applications that we can solicit from the public that will make our job easier, and that we could begin to look at collaborative planning. We do feel that we need to include the global and international concerns when we discuss these issues with the public, and we need to provide official linkage to international forums. As Michelle mentioned earlier, we want to make sure that we have local input, but we can also link to international forums so that the work of this council becomes globally understood. We should also recognize the inclusion of state and local governments in our efforts. And hopefully by town meetings and dialogue groups, as explained in the work paper, and other linkages, we will be able to seek input from state and local governments, as well as have them benefit from the work of the council and carry on a lot of the applications and actions that this council will recommend. Grassroots community groups, and I'm sure we'll get into that in the Sustainable Communities discussion, those folks who are already out there doing the work right now should be encouraged by this council. We should look at the actions that are already taking place and seek to support those actions. Not undo or redo them, but support the actions that are already occurring, because, as Michelle mentioned, not only the written material that I have received, but the telephone conversations I have had to others with other groups have been certainly well worthwhile, and there's a whole lot going out there, and there's a lot of activity and work that has been done over the last several years prior to even the work of this council getting together. And so we need to support that public input. We need to support the activities already encouraged. We suggested a national campaign, and yes, that was a typo, excuse me. It should have read not a zero-sum game, but we are looking at a national campaign where, after we have decided on the principles and the goals of this council, we will utilize the various media strategy, and we will be able to disseminate information to the public, as well as provide some mechanism for feedback back from the public. Certainly the education component, certainly educational institutions from K through 12 and the higher educational institutions can assist us in a national campaign that is going to begin to change the behavior of the American public as to how we look to a sustainable development future. We want to establish a subcommittee to create ties to the academic and scientific communities. We feel that this is necessary in order to really make sure that we commit to the work of the council. Again, we don't want a lot of layers of bureaucracy, but since we are looking to get feedback from more than members in this council, we suggest that maybe on certain subcommittees or certain activities or task groups that take place on this council, that we look to the academic and scientific communities as bringing them in as a link. One of the suggestions, other than town meetings, where we might commence to get public input, would be to look at a national network of what we called and termed dialogue groups. This is not necessarily a physical type of building where people would come together, but it is more a network of stakeholders in sustainable development. A network of stakeholders from various segments of society that would look at assisting the council in developing our objectives, more specifically than maybe what the council is looking at in a broad term, that would advance actions that this council proceeds with, and that would utilize modern communications for consensus building and a network across the country that hopefully we will begin to look at implementation of local actions on sustainability, as well as provide the ground-up fertilization approach whereby this council will obtain the end product and the end production. We feel that the PCSD should also look to placing our agenda on those of larger national associations. That is, utilizing the NGOs and utilizing many of the other national groups to make sure that they are understanding what this council is, what our goals and principles are, and how we shall proceed on behalf of this administration and the country to look at sustainable development applications. They have large organizations, they have large networks of communication, and it is felt that part of that public linkage and dialogue would to become placed on their agendas as well. We would seek to promote information exchange by applications of electronic media. Certainly contemporary media situations, exploring the use of new technologies and communications is something that this council could utilize in order to bring its positions and its goals to the forefront. But one of the main areas, and I believe as Bill Ruckelhaus mentioned earlier, is we're looking at measurement criteria. And we need some type of measurement criteria. So we would urge this council to establish a formal feedback system whereby we look at government responsiveness for those government entities on this council so that people in the public can be assured that this council, as well as its governmental integration, is accomplishing what this council set out. We look at those feedback systems providing some longevity so that we have more than a short-term type of system whereby when those of us who, when the council is due to sunset, we have those actions and those abilities to make sure that there is still the public input and that the public does carry forth the work of this council in sustainable development. Secondly, as another measurement, we would urge a development of criteria for outreach. As Michelle mentioned earlier, we have very good information, we have very creative ideas that have been brought forth to our task group, and to many of you on the council. We would like to look at the best use of current resources. We would like for this council to give our committee direction on how we develop the criteria so that we can bring those proposals in and those entities in who propose to work with the council. And also to identify future resources, whether those be financial resources or whether those be in-kind work resources for this council. Again, the caveat is we do not want to just layer more bureaucracy on already existing councils and committees, but we want to choose criteria that provides action, true public linkages into all of our communities, whether they be urban or rural, or lower socioeconomic status, or wealthier communities, and that we can actually produce results. We see our committee as a service committee to this council. And we would like to go forward knowing what you would like for us to assist you in promoting and knowing what you would like for us to do as far as bringing the public to the forefront and assisting us in the work of the council for long-term productivity. Thank you.
Jay?
In a very precise way, I don't think there's any committee whose challenge is more daunting or more important than this one, this task force. Because as we discussed at our last meeting, I'm confident you could go out here on Pennsylvania Avenue at noon and you couldn't get one person out of 100 who could talk to you intelligently for 60 seconds about the concepts of sustainable development. It doesn't mean they're not interested. It means that they simply don't understand the terminology or the concepts and how they affect their lives. So I think this committee's opportunities are phenomenal. I like very much the notion of developing a network of stakeholders, and the point I specifically want to make is to encourage this task force to focus on electronic communication technologies for establishing that network. And my specific recommendation is that I found out within the last several months that there are 1,500 community colleges around the nation. And of those 1,500, 900 have satellite uplink and downlink capacity. And that system can be accessed for $1,000 an hour. And I can envision a President's Council meeting where we're talking about the education to the public, where the President and the Vice President could be located with this council here at a location in Washington, D.C., where 900 locations around the nation could have citizens who otherwise wouldn't A, know about the issues, or B, have any opportunity to participate in a limited number of town meetings, as really an important opportunity for developing this network of stakeholders. So I encourage us to look at that opportunity that's available to us.